Welcome to episode number 29. I'm joined today by Phil Stark. Phil is the writer of Dude, Where's My Car? And also worked on South Park and That 70s Show. And today, Phil has transitioned into therapy, has transitioned into becoming a therapist. Uh,
Sure.
Thank you for joining the show today. I really appreciate your time, Phil.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So yeah, just jumping into things right off the bat. I'm curious, how did Dude, Where's My Car come to be?
Well, that was a script that I wrote while I was working on that 70s show. I had just started on that 70s show. And I had been, writing features for a long time as well. And that came out of, I started writing sketches about these two guys, sort of like a Cheech and Chong meets the Marx Brothers kind of comedy set pieces, verbal, repetitive. And I kept writing these sketches, and then eventually I had a buddy, a good friend of mine, who lost his car. He had gone to a bar and couldn't find his car, and we would drive around looking for it. And about a week later, we found it, just around the corner from the bar. And so I realized that would be a great thing to hang these sketches on, just a one crazy night kind of movie format where they were searching for something that they would eventually find, and then interspersed with that all these comedy set pieces that I had been writing. So that was sort of set it in motion as to end up figuring out what it was actually going to be.
That's funny that it's actually like the basis is actually based on a true story.
Yeah. In fact, I think that I wrote specifically in the intro, and still I think made it to the cut, which is the following story is based on actual events. Right?
Oh yeah, I actually do know what you're talking about. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was a little confused when I saw that just because it's so sci-fi-y.
Right. But it was true that it's based on somebody looking for their car. So
yeah. And so, was this something you were hired to write, or?
Oh no.
No.
In fact, it's something that I often talk about with my screenwriting clients as therapists when deciding what to write.
Yeah.
And oftentimes people will say things like, "Oh, I really need to write a thriller," or I'm working on this action spec that this producer said I should write. But in the meantime, I was jotting down some notes on this other silly thing that nobody would ever like that I really enjoy writing.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, those clients in particular, the story of Dude is that if I had pitched that idea to somebody to get support or clearance on writing it, or no, it would have never been written. And I wrote it because it was something that I liked and I thought was funny. And the irony is that when you write something that is really about your voice and your interests and something that makes you laugh individually as a person, as an audience member, that sometimes ends up being the thing that everybody really responds to, but not the thing that they would ever have asked you to do in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I know I definitely have heard advice from other screenwriters, like don't chase the market, like exactly what you were saying. And yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely what makes a lot of the great movies what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so I'm curious. Okay, so you wrote this on your own. Then did you just start pitching it? I guess I'm curious how, because I've never written a Hollywood script like that.
I had an agent at the time. I had a TV agent already, so I had a pipeline there to pour the script into, and I sent the script to my TV agent. Mm-hmm. He forwarded it to a feature agent at the agency, and they read it over the weekend, and I think on Monday I got a phone call from my feature agent saying essentially, "I love the script. We're definitely going to sell it. Hang in there. Wow. I'll let you know." And I was like, "Okay, sounds good." And then they sent it out, and it became a very popular read. I mean, the title, the way it was written, the bits, the repetitiveness, the scenes that seemed to not end but get funnier and funnier, and it was short. It was a short read. It was a very popular read, and I got a lot of meetings off of it. But ultimately, only one studio or producer made an offer on it, which is not how you would write it up perfectly, you would want multiple people to bid it up and have a.
Right.
But all it takes is really one person to buy it to succeed. So that's what ended up happening.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, and I mean the movie's definitely legendary. It's definitely got the cult classic status and widely recognized. I mean, I quote it all the time. I see it quoted all the time. You know, I told a couple of my friends who I know really enjoy the movie that I was having you on the podcast, and the first response was "and then," and the other person responded, "Dude, sweet."
Right.
And it's
Yeah.
like these quotes are used all the time. You know, it's like funny. I'm a big sports fan. I'm on a message board, and the Detroit Lions are re-signing someone who has a really big injury history, and someone photoshopped bubble wrap on him and said keep him in bubble wrap until the playoffs. And the first thing that came to mind was Zoltan.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
it's like,
those two scenes you mentioned, the "and then" scene and the dude sweet tattoo scene, those are the first two scenes that I wrote.
Oh,
Those
yeah?
were you could picture those were like you could see the Marx Brothers standing on stage and doing that bit.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. No, that's funny. And I'm just curious how that makes you feel as a writer,
Well,
like, to know that this is
no,
has
it's
such
one-
a big impact.
It's actually the 25th anniversary this year. It came out in December 2000. And, yesterday I was driving with my daughter and I couldn't remember where we parked. And I said, dude, where's my car?
Yeah.
So it happens all the time. It's wonderful. It's like an honor to have written something that people still reference.
Yeah.
And it's also really interesting because historically and personally, it dates me. Like I remember where I was when that came out. I remember I see the poster with Ashton and Sean William Scott, and I think of how young they were in that, and where I was in my life at that point. And now I have kids, and a different career, but I'm still working with screenwriters who refer to it. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. It's gotta be surreal. I mean, I know a lot of times passed and it's integrated itself into society, but I guess I'm just curious, did you have any idea that just the potential it had to reach these many people and live on for this long?
No, my God. No, but the title has really become iconic, and
Yeah.
it's sort of like a verbal meme.
Yeah.
It's I love it. I love getting a text from a relative or a friend with a screen cut of a local news story, or where, dude, where's my chimpanzee, or
Yeah.
a political story like, dude, where's my tariff, that kind of stuff. That certainly makes me a little warm inside.
Yeah, definitely. I can imagine. Yeah, and you also worked on South Park and that '70s show, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a bit about your experience on those shows?
Yeah, well, South Park was my first writing credit. I got a job there as a PA. A friend of mine was the assistant to Matt and Trey,
Uh-huh.
and they got me a job as a PA. And they knew I wanted to be a writer, so I was always sort of asking about the writing. And this is before it aired, and they had put together a writing staff, and I sort of tucked my way into becoming a writer's assistant. And then I think I was driving Trey somewhere one day, and he had mentioned not finishing a draft yet. And I said, well, I have the notes. I could finish that. And he was like, okay, go ahead. So I did that, and they liked it. And then I got notes. I did another draft, and then eventually I got the credit on that. A couple of credits in that first season, actually. And then when it aired, it was pandemonium. I mean, it aired, and it went from a nondescript office in Westwood to the cover of Time and Newsweek, and UCLA students were following us around on our lunch break because we were all wearing South Park gear.
Yeah.
So it was amazing. And then that credit, I had agents calling the production office saying, who's this guy Phil Stark? Does he have an agent?
Yeah.
So I always tell my writer clients, as frustrating as thinking you need an agent to get a job, the truth is, if you can get a job, the agents will come,
Uh-huh.
which is not any easier, but
Right.
sometimes maybe helps focus on what the most proactive and practical thing you can do is. And so that job led to an interview on That 70s Show, which was an amazing, amazing experience. That show ran for 8 seasons, and I grew up on that show. And I started at the bottom, and I got almost to the top. And it was wonderful. I mean, that show on its own was a whole career right there.
Mhm. So, okay, so you got you were there for the very beginning of both shows.
Hmm.
That's really cool. And it sounds kind of fun, like it's almost like dude, where's my car to an extent, like with respect to like you didn't really have any idea like how big these shows would become.
No, in fact, I mean, South Park, it's still on the air. It's
Yeah.
crazy. It's amazing. And I was really bummed to not stay on South Park, but Matt and Trey, they didn't have a traditional writing staff. I mean,
Uh-huh.
Comedy Central said, you know what, here's how it works. You guys are the showrunners. You hire a writing staff. You
Yeah.
give them the scripts. They write it. And we did that for the first season with like 5 writers.
Mhm.
They were all really talented and great and this credit was gold for them going forward in their careers. But ultimately, Matt and Trey really did their own thing, and they wrote all the scripts. And they would bring like a couple of buddies who they really trusted to maybe bounce stuff around, but they did not end up doing a traditional writing staff in sort of a writers guild kind of
Yeah.
classic production way. Now, that 70s show was like that. So that 70s show, and I was bummed to leave South Park, but that 70s show actually, it was not regarded as a sure thing. In fact, I was disappointed because one of my agent's other writer clients, who was a friend of mine, who was a little bit in front of me seniority wise, he got a job on Jesse, which was a Christina Applegate show at the time that
Okay.
was following Friends and it was in the post Friends time slot, 13 episodes guaranteed. I was like, oh man, I would kill to have gotten that job. Instead, I'm on this 70s show that doesn't have any stars, no
Right.
guarantee, the time slot, who knows when it's going to be on. But that was the show that ended up clicking with audiences and making stars of the cast and ended up running for 8 seasons. So you really never know how these things are going to end up.
Yeah, no, no, that's so funny. Yeah, because I honestly wasn't even familiar with the show Jesse when you mentioned it. But that
Right.
70s show, that was always on TV growing up. I mean, like there was that, King of Queens, The Simpsons, like those were always
Sure.
rolling on the TVs growing up. And then of course there was South Park. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch it, but you know, still
Right.
would
Right.
when my parents weren't around. And yeah, no, it's funny, crazy just how long that show has run, and that's so interesting to hear about its beginnings. And it's so cool that you were able to be a part of it at the very beginning. That's quite the place to get your start.
It was an amazing credit, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I always tell people, too, who are looking to break into the industry that it really takes a combination of talent, hard work, and luck. And then with a little chutzpah, sprinkled on top of that. And you have to you have to work hard, you have to be talented, and you have to have some luck. And then you have to have the chutzpah to jump at the opportunity or to make your opportunity when
Right.
the time happens. So, some of that is out of your control and some of it is within your control, but you have to sort of take it all into account.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Sounds like really good advice. Um, yeah, so you have since transitioned full time into becoming a therapist. When did you do this and why?
Well, after that 70s show ended, I did a lot of development. I sold a bunch of pilots. I wrote a bunch of scripts. I wrote a bunch of specs. I kept writing movies. I kept writing TV shows. I kept pitching. But the work was not forthcoming.
Uh-huh.
I had a lot of success early in my career, but then later in my career, not so much success. And it got to be really frustrating, and I didn't enjoy it. I got bitter. And I think that reflected in my writing and my attitude. I had such success financially and professionally. It was really frustrating that wasn't still happening.
Right.
And it took me a long time to both accept that I was unhappy doing this, but also accept that I didn't know what else to do. So it was a real transition kind of time, and it's a classic kind of midlife career change. I mean, for a television sitcom writer, but also for many other careers, you don't just start in it and then work till you're 70 and then retire.
Hmm.
Nowadays, people really transition between careers more.
Yeah.
And nobody in the entertainment industry says to you, hey, maybe you should think about doing something else because I don't know if you're going to last another 20 years with what you're doing. And in fact, people are often like, well, Phil, you had all this amazing success before. You can certainly do it again. But, it's hard enough to break in once.
Hmm.
But this is going to take me breaking in again. And while there's nothing wrong with that and there's something noble about the experience, I wasn't happy doing it. And that ultimately became my North Star. Like, what am I want to be happy.
Yeah.
So it took a long time, but eventually I decided I was going to go back to grad school, become a therapist. And I sort of had my foot in each world a little bit, but now I'm fully committed to this career as a therapist. And I can look back and appreciate how difficult that time was, but that I've made it through that transition.
Yeah. No, that's really great. You know, figuring out what you want to do and not sticking with something just because that was where you got your start and had a lot of success. I mean, I think that's really important. I mean, I've worked jobs that I haven't enjoyed, and you know, it just the importance of mental health. I mean, I think it's more important than physical health. And I mean, I've personally done years of therapy, and that's that's something that I could personally see myself transitioning into at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I just because of how important it is, and I think with those experiences myself, like I think that could lend a helping hand, like because I've already like been in the world as a client,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I mean, I think that that's really great what you've done. I
Well,
think it's a
it's
really
also
noble profession to get
yeah,
into.
it's also really a classic kind of midlife career change profession. I mean, a lot of therapists become therapists later in life
Uh huh.
because they've already had a full career that has changed or become something they no longer want to do. And oftentimes they spend their career as a therapist working with people who are going through similar issues that they had in their
Yeah.
lives previously. So it's the sort of thing where, it's a little bit of a trope, but people often want their therapist to be older than them, more experienced than them, wiser than them, almost like a future version of them to help them
Right.
deal with what they had dealt with themselves.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely relate to that. Yeah. I mean, it is funny you said like I when looking for therapists, I generally was looking for older, more experienced, more wiser.
Sure,
So I
yeah, it's a
definitely
natural.
play into that. I know there's so many different types of therapy and different schools of thought and whatnot. I'm curious what work you specifically do.
Well, you're right. There's many different modalities and approaches. When I was training, I was really concerned with which one I was going to align myself with,
Yeah.
but I find myself drawing from all of them in a sort of a holistic way.
Hmm.
Therapy to me is me being curious. It's a conversation. There's a lot of
Yeah.
questions, and I often invite clients to think about very simple questions that they think they know the answer to, or things they've never considered because they seem so obvious.
Yeah.
And examining our bias and sort of really zooming out on our definition of ourselves and sort of seeing how we might have painted ourselves into corners in certain ways. But and then there's all kinds of modalities, especially with couples, that sometimes clients hear that a friend got EMDR or that a friend saw a therapist who's trained in CBT,
Hmm.
and they often then search, well, I want that acronym. I want
Right.
somebody with those training, which is wonderful. But I find myself inclined less to align myself with any one kind of acronym and and instead more, because the exciting thing about the work is that I don't know where it's going to go. And it's often
Uh-huh.
a conversation that leads to places that we don't understand. So I try to be very sensitive to being open to exploring rather than sort of coming in with a map.
That's interesting. Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I've tried so many different methods and whatnot, and yeah, I mean, that's really cool. That sounds like a really great way of going about things or approaching things as a therapist.
Right. Well, to give you an example, I mean, oftentimes be talking with a client and there'll be a question and the answer will sort of start to meander and explore, and then we'll find ourselves talking about something else. And the client will say something like, "Oh no, I'm so sorry. We got off on this tangent. What was the original question?" And I'll say, "Well, you know what? The tangent is really what we're here to talk about. The
Yeah,
tangent is sort of what we didn't think we were going to discuss, but that ended up coming up. And I think that's maybe the area we should investigate." And that's sort of like a metaphor, I think, for what I think the therapy experience should be like.
yeah. So I guess like what are you referring to is or like what an example of this? Because this reminds me of something. I guess I'll give the example of me. So like for example, there were like these problems on the forefront of my brain, and I would say, "This is my problem. This is my problem." And then it's like then I'm getting asked about my childhood and growing up and my relationship with my family, and it's like, whoa, there's like a ton of problems here that like you didn't even that like I didn't even realize that I had. It's like this is actually the problem, like what was going on in your early life, like not like the symptoms that you're feeling as a
Right.
20-year old. Is that
Right.
like an example of?
Well, yeah, I mean, to give a very basic example, like a client might be talking about some conflict in their relationship with their partner,
Mhm.
and they're talking about this fight that they had. And then they sort of keep talking about it, and they maybe, this is very simplistic, but they might be
Yeah,
talking about how they remember that their dad and mom had a similar dynamic,
yeah.
or that they remember a moment from childhood that they saw a couple having a fight in a similar way, and then they're sort of talking about how it was growing up or something like that. And then like, oh, hold on, you were asking me about my girlfriend, right? And
Mhm.
I'm like, well, hold on, this is really, I mean,
Yeah.
we've essentially meandered into the real area to explore, which by sort of an eventual exploration of that kind of original emotional material ends up affecting maybe how we interact with our partner in a way that's much more intuitive or free flowing than just, okay, when she says this, you should say this,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. No, that's a really great example, and that like just really makes me think. I mean, I've always, well, not always, but like since like going into therapy, like I've always been a big advocate that it's something everyone should do, and I think that like the like example you just gave, like that's something that probably affects most, if not all, people, like that sort of thing, and but people don't even know it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or they know it, but they've never really said it out loud.
Yeah,
Because there's once you say something out loud, like, wow, I guess the way my dad treated my mom really does influence how I treat my partner.
right.
That's something you know consciously or subconsciously, but when you
Mhm.
say it out loud, it really gives it more concrete. It gives it power. It gives you the ability to really focus on it and then maybe eventually even change it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, therapy is so powerful. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just something that I think we would all be better off as a society if it was something that everyone took part in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so you mentioned I didn't realize this, but you said you have screenwriting clients right now because I was going to ask if you had any ambitions of ever getting back in. It sounds like you still do have a foot in that world, at least.
Well, listen, I'm not writing a spec. I'm not developing any pitches. I'm not looking to write anything again besides
Okay.
books. And that's a pleasure. But I really enjoy working. I mean, part of my practice is working with writers.
Mhm.
And I'm not a writing coach, I've had writers approach me and be like, "Hey, I want to hire you to help me with the script or something."
Mhm.
But I'm a therapist who works with writers, so the
Okay, yeah.
work I do with writers is therapy work on themselves,
Uh-huh.
understanding themselves, and often that's dealing with burnout or imposter syndrome. Um, Sometimes it also is specific to their writing. I mean, helping a client who's a writer understand themselves and what makes them tick and why they do and say the things they do and say that might be in conflict or a contradiction to what they say they want
Yeah.
is an amazing tool to be aware of that in order to then write characters who are
Mhm.
just as compelling and complicated.
Yeah, definitely. That's no, that's really interesting. That's so funny because I do screenwriting and I because of therapy, it's taken me places that I never thought I could go. And like I feel like I have like a stronger understanding. Also like with the growth I've had as a person, like just thinking about past versions of myself and
Mm-hmm.
situations I've been in. Like therapy has definitely helped me a ton in that respect. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's really cool to hear that you're able to connect clients in that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is there anything you would like to promote?
World peace. Let's go.
That's a good one.
It's a good one, right? I should mention my book, which is called Dude, Where's My Car? Tharsis. It's a book all about talk therapy.
Uh-huh.
It stems from my work as a therapist and its observations and experiences and concepts and metaphors that I found helpful to clients in therapy. And it's written as a friendly and engaging guide to talk therapy for people maybe who have never been in therapy, who are curious about it, or who have been in it. And that's available on Amazon. I think it's a
Okay.
wonderful tool for people who are curious about therapy. I actually have another book coming out soon. It's called How to Win at Couples Therapy.
Uh-huh.
And it's about couples therapy. And it's about how sometimes in relationships things can get antagonistic and competitive. And we can act like we're on opposing teams, but that the importance in relationships is to change that mindset so that you are on the same team and you're supportive of your partner like a teammate. And it's a similar book. It's a collection of observations and metaphors and experiences I've had working with couples about improving their relationships. So really, all I promote now are my books. I don't have any pilots or movies or
Yeah.
anything to promote. And then, of course, there's my practice. You know, I'm based in California. I see clients in person in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I also see clients online all over the state of California and Florida via telehealth. I started training as a therapist like the week before COVID started. So I've developed my entire practice like this. I mean, this is my office.
Yeah.
This is what therapy with me is like, except I'm not wearing the headphones in therapy.
Right.
But yeah, I work mostly with men on like midlife issues like
Uh-huh.
divorce, parenting, relationship conflict, career burnout, midlife transitions, similar to what I went through.
Yeah,
And then
definitely.
I also love working with creatives, screenwriters, comedians, authors, producers, people in the industry, oftentimes drawing from my experience with the trials and tribulations and the difficulties of having a career in that field.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it sounds like great work, and I'll include the link to your website and the Amazon link to Dude, Where's My Catharsis?
Mm-hmm.
And your second book is that are pre-orders available or
It's not up yet, but there's also a book that I wrote many years before that. Just to continue with the title, I mean, I think I finally squeezed all the juice out of that title I can. But years ago, I also wrote a book called "Dad, Where's My Blankie,"
oh
which is it's a kid's picture book that I wrote when my kids were younger.
yeah.
But the great thing about my couples book, How to Win at Couples Therapy, is that I'm finally writing something that's not a pun on the title of the movie. So you know, there's not out for pre-orders yet, but I'm putting the finishing touches. I'm publishing it myself, so whenever I
Awesome.
happen to want to click the link or post it, it'll be available.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Something just came to mind before I get into my questions I ask all my guests. Is there any truth to Seriously, Dude, Where's My Car, the sequel?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I should say I wrote it. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote, I think, 2 or 3 different versions of this sequel, which was going to be called, seriously, Dude, Where's My Cartharsis? Dude, Where's My Car? And then like that was maybe like a couple years after the original came out, and it didn't happen. And then like I think 5 years later, Ashton became interested in maybe doing a version where the dudes are a little more grown up, something like Dude, Where's My Car Seat? Looking for their wives are pregnant and they bought the special car seat, something like that. So I wrote a version of that. So no sequel actually ended up getting made.
Right.
This being the 25th anniversary, we actually kicked around the idea of a musical, Dude, Where's My Car? The musical.
Yeah.
But that didn't really go anywhere. So we'll see what happens. It's such an iconic title. I think every now and then somebody picks it up and kicks it around and sees if it might be viable to do something with it.
Yeah.
And maybe there will be eventually, but it's sort of out of my hands, and I'm much more relaxed and less anxious worrying about or trying to make something like that happen instead of just letting it happen if it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Getting into my questions I ask all my guests. So this first one, I know you're out of the industry, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts about what could be points of optimism for the future of the industry.
Well, it's interesting because, I am out of the industry in that I'm not actively writing, but I'm very much in the industry in that I live in Los Angeles and many of my friends are still in the industry, and I work with a lot of clients who are in the industry.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it seems like a very difficult time. I mean, I remember, even when I was writing, I felt like it was a difficult time, but the reality was at that point, when I got my job on that 70s show, there were, like 30 half-hour multi-camera shows on network TV. So there were a lot of jobs. And then, as you mentioned, growing up watching reruns, well, syndication was the big market for that. The whole reason why you produce 200 episodes of a show doing 25 a year is because they were so valuable to sell into syndication and run on all the after-school kind of local stations all over the country and the world.
Right.
And so when that changed, when the explosion of streaming and the reruns didn't really matter anymore, and they were then financially not as desirable, that changed the whole dynamic. So I feel like a dinosaur sometimes talking to clients who are thrilled to get a 6-episode run on a Netflix show, but they don't know when it's going to air or if they're going to come back for a second season. And what is a season? In fact, I feel like a dinosaur saying the word TV sometimes. So I can relate to the frustration and the experience of being in that situation, but with the specifics, it's much different for the people nowadays as it was for me back then. But the whole challenge of breaking into an industry, of being an artist, and trying to write to your voice, but at the same time write something that people will sell. The difficulty of trying to project the kind of self-confidence that we want to have, but yet, as our nature of artists, we're often very self-critical. That's a balance that I think is eternal in that field.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it definitely does seem like a super difficult time right now. So if someone was looking for something to be optimistic about, is there anything that comes to mind with respect to the future of the industry?
I mean, it's hard to find silver linings right now. I guess, something about all the chaos and the change. Maybe if you're new coming into it, you don't have any bias or expectations about how the way things used to be. So you're more open to the way things could be.
Yeah.
And I think that's a positive. I think whether you're writing a spec TV show or a movie or creating a digital short or doing something on social media, I think people who are creative and want to get into the industry should do something that they love and that they think is funny, that makes their stupid little thing that makes their friends laugh. Because those are the things I think that people really end up responding to, as opposed to, I'm going to write my version of The Office, or I'm going to, create kind of a whatever going along with the tropes or whatever is popular at the moment.
Yeah, that's solid advice. And then, what are your top five comedy movies of all time?
Oh wow. Well, off the top of my head, I remember really loving the Blues Brothers.
Uh huh.
The Blues Brothers was one movie that I had on VHS. I watched over and over. That was a classic. I love the first couple of Cheech and Chong movies.
Uh huh.
Really love those. And then I guess it's interesting because I'm talking about these movies that were formative in my youth, like Caddyshack,
Yeah.
Meatballs, Spies Like Us, even Stripes. These are all like the iconic movies that I grew up on. There's of course many more over time that I love too. But I think in terms of what are my favorites, I also think formative, and those would be my favorite and formative.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's funny. I've actually seen all of those. Sometimes I have guests on, and I haven't seen a lot of the movies they mentioned, but no, those are all some really good picks. Uh, yeah, no, I really appreciate all of your time, Phil, and thank you very much for coming on. A lot of fun, and I really appreciate all the stories.
Well, my pleasure. I'm a fan of the podcast, and you're doing great work.
Oh, well, thank you very much. You're doing much better work. You're making big impacts in people's lives. I mean, I can't stress how big of an advocate I am for therapy, and it's really thank you for the work you do.
My pleasure. And it's certainly something that feels good to, like you've probably experienced in therapy. It's good to sit with somebody and help guide them through a difficult time.
Definitely.